I am currently the Delaware Riverkeeper, which means my work is to be the voice of the Delaware River and to lead an organization called the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, which is an organization that works throughout the 4 states of the Delaware River watershed and very literally fights the good fight every single day to preserve our beautiful Delaware River and all the tributaries that feed it. Now, this Green Amendment movement, though, why this is important and why you need to know that I've been doing this work for 25 years is because this Green Amendment movement and the message that I'm going to speak to you about today is an outgrowth of my 25 years of work trying to protect and preserve our beautiful Delaware River. The goal of a Green Amendment is to find a new path for environmental protection because fundamentally our current system of environmental protection laws is failing us. We very literally have hundreds of thousands of environmental protection laws here in the United States of America. And as each of these laws has been passed and implemented, they have helped reduce pollution, they have helped prevent some illnesses and protect communities from droughts and floods and wildfires induced by the activities of humans. But fundamentally, big picture, across the landscape, across the nation, this current system of laws has fundamentally failed us. And it's failed us because the way these laws are written, they are written to accept pollution and degradation and the take of species as a foregone conclusion, a necessary evil, something that we must accept and accommodate in our modern day world if we want to live the lives that we choose to live. And so as a result, these laws are written, right? They're written to reduce pollution and to reduce degradation, but they are not focused on how do we prevent it in the first place and not accept it as a foregone conclusion from the get-go. And so as a result, we very literally have communities across the nation that are being harmed by pollution and degradation. Communities like the community of Paulsboro that finds their drinking water contaminated with a family of chemicals known as perfluorinated compounds, or PFCs for short. PFCs are a toxic family of chemicals, and it is known that those who have the misfortune of coming into contact with PFCs, let alone drinking it in their drinking water for decades, like the people of Paulsboro, suffer very serious health consequences from birth till end of life. And the people of Paulsboro, right, it's not just the people of Paulsboro actually that have PFCs in their drinking water supplies. We actually have communities across the nation that find their drinking water contaminated with PFCs. And the PFCs got into the drinking water of Paulsboro and into the drinking water of all these other communities through the very legal use by either industry or by the military. Despite all of these environmental protection laws we have in place, we have families like the Stauffer family that finds themselves living next to a highly contaminated site, a site which, as I describe it, is super saturated with dangerous contaminants, including something known as trichloroethylene, TCE. TCE, like PFCs, has very serious health consequences for those who have the misfortune of coming into contact with it. This site, what's known as the Bishop Tube site, has been super saturated with TCE for literally decades. The government has known about it for about 30 years now, and yet has done almost nothing to clean up the TCE at this site. And as a result, the pollution plume has been allowed to spread more than a mile away, bringing this TCE to new environments and to new communities. If you were to talk with Kate Stauffer, that's Liz Stauffer's mother, she will tell you that she believes one of the reasons why Liz Stauffer has had to battle with brain tumors 3 times in her young life is because of her exposure over the length of her life to TCE and other contaminants at the Bishop Tube site. That's what her mother absolutely believes. Now, despite all these environmental laws we have in place, we have communities like the community of Minnesink that found itself faced recently with the proposed construction of what's called a fracked gas compressor station. Fracked gas compressor stations are highly polluting industrial operations that release hazardous air pollutants of all kinds when they're in operation. And it is known that the people who have the misfortune of living next to these compressor stations suffer all kinds of serious health consequences. Despite the fact that we know this about fracked gas compressor stations, despite the fact that the people of Minnesink got themselves organized to battle against the construction of this fracked gas compressor station, despite the fact that we have all of these environmental protection laws in place, this compressor station operates now in the heart of the community of Minnesink. And if you go there and you speak with the people of Minnesink, they will tell you about how the quality of their lives have suffered. They will tell you about how their property values have suffered. They will tell you about how their health and the health of their children has suffered since this compressor station went into operation. Despite all these laws we have in place, actually because of all these laws we have in place, frankly, minority communities, low-income communities, immigrant communities continue to be targeted for highly polluting operations and activities. Whether you're talking about the air or the water or the land, minority communities have a much higher rate of exposure to dangerous toxins than the rest of us. And in fact, minority children don't have to wait to be born to have a higher rate of exposure to dangerous toxins that will affect them throughout the entirety of their lives, including potentially impacting even their capacity to learn. And of course, we know increasingly we have communities that are suffering from the ravages of climate change. And it's not just the human communities that are being impacted by all this pollution and degradation that's happening despite all these environmental laws in place. Our plant and animal friends are suffering as well. This is one of the few Atlantic sturgeon that's born in the Delaware River today. The Delaware River is actually home to a genetically unique population of Atlantic sturgeon that exists nowhere else on Earth but in our beautiful Delaware River. At this point, because of the legal actions and activities of people, we have less than 300 spawning adults left. And yet, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, week in and week out, I have to continue to battle against ongoing and new threats to the Atlantic sturgeon of the Delaware River. And all of this is happening, all these stories and so much more, despite the fact that we have all these environmental protection laws in place. And when I go into communities that are facing these kinds of dangerous threats, inevitably they have the same question for me. The same question. Why? Why? Why is this happening to us? Why are we facing this dangerous industrial operation or threat to our community, to our children, to our natural resources? Don't we as people here on this earth have a right to clean water and clean air and a healthy environment? Isn't that our right by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth? And I have the sad job of telling them no. No. You do not have that right. You have all sorts of rights here in the United States of America. You have a right to free speech and freedom of religion. You have due process rights. You have private property rights. You have gun rights. In the state of New York, you have a right to play bingo. But in states across the nation, you do not have a right to a healthy environment. That is not your right, except with very limited exception. Actually, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you have all of these other human, civil, and political rights we hold dear laid out in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And you have a constitutionally protected and recognized right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And so people ask me, how is it possible that the people of Pennsylvania have these rights when the rest of us in other states do not? If you look at Pennsylvania's history, it's just as rich in environmental exploitation and degradation as every other state across the nation. They allow just as much pollution to be spewed into the air and just as much pollution to be spewed into the water. They allow just as many industrial operations to overwhelm Pennsylvania's communities. So what is it about Pennsylvania that was different, that allowed the people of Pennsylvania to get this constitutional right to a healthy environment? Well, what was different was this gentleman. His name is Franklin Curry, And Franklin Curry got himself elected to the Pennsylvania legislature in the late 1960s. And he very quickly realized that one of the reasons why Pennsylvania's environment was allowed to become so degraded that it was impacting every aspect of the lives of the people of Pennsylvania was because we were not, in fact, recognizing and protecting the right to a healthy environment in the same way we were recognizing and protecting all of those other fundamental rights we hold dear. And so Franklin Curry decided he was going to change that. And in 1971, Franklin Curry proposed that an amendment be added to the Pennsylvania Constitution, an amendment that would recognize and protect the inalienable right of all people to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment. When this amendment went before the Pennsylvania House of Representatives in 1971, it passed unanimously. And when it went before the Senate, it passed unanimously. And when it went before the people of Pennsylvania, as you can imagine, it passed overwhelmingly by a vote of 4-1. And so in 1971, the people of Pennsylvania had their constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so you would have thought from that moment on, environmental protection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania would have been so much better than in every other state across the nation. But I see some shaking heads, right? If you pay attention to the news in Pennsylvania, you know and I know that that was not to be the story for Pennsylvania's environment. And it wasn't to be the story because very early on, there was an incredible overreach in how people sought to use the newly minted constitutional right to a healthy environment. And long story short, we won't go into the ins and the outs, but long story short, very early on, there came to be a series of decisions out of the Pennsylvania courts, including the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which, as the Supreme Court Chief Justice described it at the time, disemboweled, emasculated Pennsylvania's newly minted Environmental Rights Amendment, what I call Pennsylvania's Green Amendment, declared it to be good public policy, but not to have the same legal strength as every other provision in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And so that's the way things stood for 42 years. For 42 years, this great right on the books, but nothing had really changed for the people of Pennsylvania. Fast forward to the mid-2000s and enter drilling and fracking for gas from shale, bringing to Pennsylvania communities all of its highly polluting industrial operations, bringing with it tremendous deforestation and land transformation and devastation of the natural resources of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, bringing with it the creation of massive volumes of highly toxic frack wastewater so toxic even the industry doesn't have a good solution for what to do with it, except to use it in more fracking operations, to store it on the land surface in plastic-lined pits, to ship it off to places like Oklahoma where they inject it into the ground in the hopes that they will never see it again, and in so doing creates hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of earthquakes for the people of Oklahoma. It brought with it water pollution, pollution of our rivers and our streams and our groundwater, and even people's drinking water supplies. It brought with it the release of hazardous air pollutants of all kinds, including climate-changing methane emissions. It brought with it the proliferation of infrastructure, pipelines, and compressor stations, and more. And given the state of the law in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, it was really easy for the fracking industry to have their way with Pennsylvania's natural resources and Pennsylvania's communities. But the way I always describe it, for the industry, for those folks, just wasn't easy enough. They wanted to find a way to make it even easier for themselves to have their way with Pennsylvania communities when it came to fracking. And so very literally, leaders from the fracking industry got together and went behind closed doors and wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. A piece of legislation that was very handily and quickly passed by the Pennsylvania legislature and signed into law by the Pennsylvania governor in 2012. Now, as you can imagine, this legislation was a veritable gift basket to the industry. They had written it for themselves. It did all kinds of horrible things. It gave them the power of eminent domain to force the storage of their highly explosive gas under the surface of the earth, under people's properties who didn't want them. It gave them automatic waivers from critical environmental protections. It mandated that drilling and fracking be allowed to happen in every part of every community, including in their residential districts, right? And so the truth is, as bad as things were for the people of Pennsylvania, already, things were about to get a whole lot worse when it came to drilling and fracking. Now, at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we knew instantly we had to find a way to take on Act 13. We couldn't let this law stand. But how do you take on a law that's been passed by the legislature and signed by the governor? What can you do? You can try to get the legislature to repeal it. That wasn't going to happen in Pennsylvania. So you have to find a higher power. You have to find a higher power. And we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network believed that we had that higher power in that long-ignored Pennsylvania Green Amendment. We believed that maybe we were in a moment in time when even the industry had so overreached that the Pennsylvania courts would be willing to take another look at how they interpreted and applied this long-ignored Green Amendment. So we teamed up with 7 towns and a physician to challenge Act 13. And the argument that the Delaware Riverkeeper Network brought to this joint venture was that the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were unconstitutional because they violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. This case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, a very conservative Supreme Court led by a very conservative Supreme Court Chief Justice. And despite that, we got an amazing opinion. And we got an amazing opinion that was actually, the plurality opinion was actually written by that Chief Justice. The opinion came out on December 19th of 2013, and I want you to read with me a few of the things that Chief Justice Castile wrote in the reaction to the Act 13 challenge. By any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale formation, drilling and fracking, will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty. And that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact unconstitutional because they violated the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, with that victory, not only did we defeat some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13, but we very literally breathed legal life back into that long-ignored Green Amendment and restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment. And Chief Justice Castile made very, very clear to the people of Pennsylvania that their right to a healthy environment was an inherent, indefeasible, inalienable right that belonged to them by virtue of the fact that they were people here on this earth. That these were not rights given to the people of Pennsylvania by the Green Amendment. These are rights that they already had by virtue of the fact that they were people here on this earth. But that what Pennsylvania's Green Amendment did was give these rights the highest legal recognition and protection you can get under the law here in the United States of America. Bill of Rights, constitutional level recognition and protection. Now, since we accomplished that victory in Pennsylvania, we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network and others seeing the power in our victory have been doing the work of defining what it means to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment and then defending those rights. Because it's not instantly clear, right? I mean, if you think about it, we've had the rights to free speech and freedom of religion and many of those other fundamental freedoms for hundreds of years. And yet we still have advocacy and litigation over what they mean in one context or another. So we're just starting that work in Pennsylvania, but we're having tremendous success, even when it comes to the fracking industry. But as we've been doing that work, right, in the months following our Act 13 victory, I realized that there was more in this victory than just for the people of Pennsylvania. That there was actually a message for all communities in all states across our nation. The message that our rights to pure water and clean air and a healthy environment are inalienable, inherent, indefeasible rights that belong to us by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. That these are rights that are worthy of constitutional recognition and protection. And that we in communities across the nation must rise up together and demand and defend our environmental rights. And I believe that the best way we can do that is to rise up together with what I call a Green Amendment movement. A movement that seeks the passage of green amendments in every single state across our nation. Right? Now, why do we need a Green Amendment movement? We need a movement because there are only 2 states that have a Green Amendment. Pennsylvania and Montana. That's it. There are over 40 other states that talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't rise to the level of being a Green Amendment. If they're in the Bill of Rights section, they talk about things like fishing, hunting, and trapping rights or the right to navigate waterways, but they don't talk about the right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And if they do talk about the right to clean air, clean water, and a healthy environment, they begin or end the sentence with, and that's good public policy, immediately robbing it of its legal strength, right? Or saying that the way you get these rights is that your legislators pass laws to protect the environment. But that's the situation we're in now, so that doesn't change anything. And most important, they are not self-executing provisions in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution that recognizes and protects the inalienable right to a healthy environment and legally protects them in the same way we legally protect all those other human, civil, and political rights that we find in the Bill of Rights section of our state constitutions. And as Rachel Carson recognized, and you can see some of her beautiful quotes to this point, we have to acknowledge that we don't have a Green Amendment in our federal constitution either. And so the question is, for states across the nation, are we in a moment in time when people are willing and wanting to recognize, to realize that our current system of environmental protection laws are failing us, and that in many instances they are actually part of the problem, and that we need to find a better path to protect our environment, and that better path is available in the passage of green amendments? And if you look at the news headlines in states across the nation, you will see that communities across the nation are suffering from pollution and degradation. So I believe that communities are in that moment in time. They are in that moment in time. And in fact, since we started this Green Amendment movement, we actually have secured the proposal of a Green Amendment in the state of New York, and one in the state of New Jersey, and one in the state of Maryland, and one in the state of West Virginia. So we can see that this movement really is taking hold. Now, people ask me, what does it mean to get a Green Amendment? Because you don't instantly, it's not an instant panacea to all our environmental problems, not by a long shot, right? You don't have a Green Amendment and suddenly all is right with our natural world. So what is it that happens right away when we get a Green Amendment? A lot of important things happen. First off, our rights to a healthy environment are legally protected on par with those other human rights, political rights, civil rights we hold dear. Every government official at every level of government is duty bound by the Constitution to protect people's environmental rights. And they have to protect them for both present and future generations. No longer is it okay for government officials to say, well, I complied with the law when I did that environmentally damaging whatever. Now they have to prove that they took the extra step to ensure that whatever it was they were proposing to do complied with their constitutional duty to protect the environment. No longer is government focused on managing pollution through permits and reviews and the like. Now the focus of government decision-making must be on prevention of pollution, prevention of degradation. If a Green Amendment is properly framed and written, that becomes the constitutional standard. Government officials become duty-bound to consider the facts and the impacts and the science of the actions and the activities and the decisions that they're about to make or allow to happen. And they have to do that before they render their decisions, not as an after-the-fact rationalization. As government officials go forth to do their work of engaging in governmenting, they have to find a way to advance all of their goals and protect the environment at the same time. If there has been so much degradation that a community has lost their right to a healthy environment, their constitutional right to a healthy environment, government does become duty-bound to restore those rights, to take the actions and activities necessary to restore those environmental rights. Environmental justice is strengthened because every individual in every community, regardless of the color of their skin or their income or their physical or mental capacities, has the same constitutional right to a healthy environment. And so government officials must treat all of us and protect all of us equitably. No longer do people go to government meetings hoping that their government officials will do the right thing by the environment. They now go into these meetings, public and private, expecting their government officials to do the right thing. They stand straighter, they speak more firmly, they use stronger language. And when their government officials fail them, they don't sit down and shut up. They battle on. They battle on to get the right outcome. Environmental advocates are no longer dismissed as just tree huggers and fish lovers, or job killers and people haters, or environmental terrorists or eco-jihadists. Environmentalists are now recognized for what we truly are. True U.S. patriots who are rising up to defend a constitutional right that belongs to all of us.
Amen.
The goal of a Green Amendment is good decisions on the front end. Support the good, prevent the bad. That's the true goal, and that's the true success and power of a Green Amendment. But if our government officials get it wrong, and they don't do that, if they get it wrong, what a Green Amendment does is give people immediate access to the courts so they can bring a legal challenge to vindicate their constitutional right to a healthy environment. We are working hard through Green Amendments for the Generations to bring this message to every community, to everyone, including into the schools, to deliver the message of the power and importance of Green Amendments. And so I hope with that you've actually joined me on my journey and have ended in that place to realize and recognize our current system of laws is fundamentally failing us. But there is something we can do about it. And the thing we can do about it is rise up together and seek and secure the passage of Green Amendments in every single state constitution across the nation. And then ultimately be prepared and be ready as step number 2 to secure a Green Amendment in our federal constitution as well. So thank you for coming to this beautiful space and place and joining me on this in this talk, in this adventure, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Yes?
Do you have attorneys on standby ready to fight the fight for the individuals within each state?
So certainly in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, where we have a Green Amendment, part of the work of Green Amendments for the Generations is to pursue litigation. Sorry, that was the question. Do we have attorneys on the ready to vindicate these rights where we get them? In Pennsylvania, where we already have a Green Amendment, we do have attorneys on staff, and we are doing that work. And that's where we're getting some really good precedents. And my ultimate vision and goal for the new Green Amendments for the Generations nonprofit organization and vision is, yes, we will, once we start getting Green Amendments passed in different states across the nation, we will, in these different states, be prepared to use that Green Amendment as a tool for environmental protection, including through litigation. But of course, we're not there yet. So the way that we are starting this work is we're starting this work by trying to inspire communities to pursue Green Amendments, to support them in their efforts to seek and secure Green Amendments. And when we get to the point where we have them passed in other states, multiple other states, it will be a good problem to have to find the resources to help vindicate those rights. We're just not there yet, unfortunately. Mm-hmm.
My nephew lives in Pittsburgh, and his job is to go out to rural areas and test stream water.
Mm-hmm.
And that's paid work. And I think that's wonderful. When he got the job, I thought it was so miraculous. But the issue about water table contamination, which is something that we don't know how to deal with, it still remains in Pennsylvania. My sister had a neighbor who lived in a quite old house where the gas stove was right next to the sink, and she was cooking and rinsed some things, and the water literally in the sink caught on fire. And that gives you an idea of how far the water table in certain areas has been penetrated. So that there is still work to do in pushing for cleanup and pushing for the science to be able to do that work. But first we need this. And I think of what my nephew's doing in tracking things and being sure that they're all right. And that to me is wonderful.
So the comment was just a recognition of how things really are still quite damaged in Pennsylvania and how important science is as part of the solution in addition to a Green Amendment. Because of course you can't pursue a successful legal case unless you've got good facts, and often that means good science. And it is troubling to people that even though we have a Green Amendment in Pennsylvania, we haven't stopped fracking instantly. I mean, I can tell you, I believe absolutely if we had a powerful, meaningful Green Amendment first, I believe we could have kept the industry out. The problem is that the industry was in first. And so if you think about here in the state of Maryland or any state where you've got highly polluting industrial operations, if we get a Green Amendment passed, those operations won't instantly disappear and the law won't instantly kick them out, because you then are in the situation of having to do the work in each individual situation or circumstance, whether it's a permit or the passage of a law or some approval, of having to prove that that action or activity violated the Green Amendment, and in so doing help to create precedent that will address other like situations and prevent new ones from happening. But it doesn't instantly apply to everything, right? You have to go piece by piece by piece. And so that's what we're having to do in Pennsylvania. But again, we are having some really important successes. And on forthegenerations.org, we've got a great webinar and some materials that highlight some of those key legal successes that are making a difference.
Hi, I want to first of all thank you for your work. I read your book. I was extremely inspired. Everyone should read the book. It's fantastic. I'm working with Rabbi Nina Beth Carton, who initiated the campaign to get a Green Amendment here in Maryland. I missed the beginning. Did you talk about that?
So I did acknowledge that Maryland has a proposal, and in fact, Nina Beth Carton, she called me before any of that and said, how do I do this in Maryland? And I was instantly down within a week or two. We met with the first elected official that proposed the first iteration, and I've been working with Nina ever since to advance the Green Amendment here in Maryland.
So I wanted to let everyone know that I had never read our state constitution, but because I was helping with this campaign, I went and read our constitution, and I found out that it's been amended quite frequently over the years. This is not a big deal to amend the Constitution, and it's just a matter of people getting involved. And I'm involved with the Montgomery County Faith Alliance for Climate Solutions, which is mobilizing houses of worship. And if anyone's interested in getting involved in the campaign, I'd be happy to talk with them. Thank you so much for inspiring this incredible movement.
And also,
what's your name?
My name is Mirala Goldsmith.
Okay.
And also on Green Amendments for the Generations, in every state where Green Amendment's advancing, we have a page, and that page both gives you the status, gives you tools, gives you ways to get active and on the amendment, and then also will connect you with whatever locals we're working with who are leading the campaign. Do you want me to take one more, or am I? You can hook me off.
Quick,
One more.
quick.
This is a follow-up on some of the other questions and things you've said, but how are you marshaling the resources in 48 states all across the country? Are you working with environmental organizations that have state level lobbyists for the legislatures? I mean, you can't do this yourself, obviously, so how are you coordinating this around?
So the question is, how are we coordinating this around the country? The work of Green Amendments for the Generations is to serve as the inspiration and the resource and to be part of the effort in every single state. But because I'm not from every single state, I'm not the most persuasive messenger. But I am going to be one of the most powerful resources, both in the knowledge and also in how to most effectively, from a grassroots perspective, get organized and advance and advance it. So what I do is, in the states, I identify the leaders through talks like this, connect with them, work with them, become part of the leadership team to design the strategy to pursue the Green Amendment, and then to be an active part of it. Every single state has a different set of environmental organizations and leaders that are going to get involved. My goal is not to ship this off to some national organization that's going to use it as a big fundraiser for themselves. As you can see, I don't get a penny from the books because I'm about saving the world, right? And unfortunately, that can happen sometimes. So what I do is I go into the states and I identify the local groups, large or small, who want to be the leaders there, and then work with them, and then the different players come to their table. And sometimes it is national organizations, and sometimes it's just a bunch of local organizations. But we make sure that the initiative starts with, and the power always stays with, those local leaders who had the vision from the get-go and therefore are most committed to it. We don't have much funding yet. Green Amendments for the Generations is early. And so I'm looking for grants and donations and everything, just like I do as the Delaware Riverkeeper, to do this good work. So thank you for the question, and I'm going to be hooked off. I am, but I believe in it. So thank you.